All right, we should be good. Welcome, everyone. This is State of Exile, episode 40. Today we have the senior designer and producer, Carl. And then we have the managing director, Chris Wilson. And along with me is the senior executive co-producer of the State of Exile Podcast, ZiggyD. And myself, I'm ZenocideGenius, the community member.
Welcome,
I love those titles.
Being a community member is a very difficult role to play, okay?
It's the hardest out of the four of us.
Oh, clearly.
You have to produce the most salt, of course.
So today's episode, I just want to say thanks, guys, for coming on board. This is the first time we've had both Chris with someone else, and these guys are always busy, so I appreciate both of you coming on.
You're welcome. It's great to be here. I love doing these, and I think this is my third or fourth one so far, right?
Let's see. I think it's your fourth, yeah.
I think it's my second.
It's your third, Carl. You came on with
Third,
Rory,
Carl.
and then Beta, and now. So you guys are always on the show, and we appreciate, the community really appreciates you guys taking time out of your busy day, because we know Monday is hell day for you guys.
Yeah, we have a company meeting in a couple of hours, so that's why we have to wrap it up within 2 hours, I guess.
That's all right. So today will be a little bit shorter of a show. It'll be just the four of us, and then that's it. There will be no part two. Also, with this show, Chris and Carl, there is no video, but they are sharing a microphone, so don't be confused there. So, that's all. Today's discussions will be primarily discussing racing, the racing seasons maybe to come, what their plan, GG's vision with racing is, the next patch 2.0.4b, as well as Challenge League design, Divination cards, and then maybe what's to come in trading. So we're gonna have to jam pack this in less than 2 hours. So thanks for tuning in, everyone. Let's kick this off. So Chris, would you like at this point in time to describe to the audience what exactly you do over there at Grinding Gear Games?
So I'm one of the founders of the company, and I basically handle most of the business and supervision of the project kind of aspect. So it's my job to make sure Path of Exile is good and that the company, pays its staff on time and that kind of stuff. And in terms of on the project, I still notionally have the title of lead designer, but I kind of try to let other people do most of the design work. I basically come in whenever there's item-related stuff because that's what I mostly enjoy doing. And basically, I'm typically involved in the early stages of any new stuff that we're working on, and then just doing project management to make sure that it's delivered at the right time, and basically release dates are my responsibility and getting marketing locked in and that kind of stuff.
And for you, Carl, what is your main role over there at Grinding Gear Games?
So the design part is we've now got a team of 5 designers. So I often the designers are very active and self-motivating. So they're very keen and get on with design, and I mostly just try to keep up. From the production side of things, I live in the future, so there's all this sort of stuff that'll be coming later, which I can't talk about, so mostly I'll have to talk about the state of things as they are at the moment, and for racing some of the future plans.
Oh, so many secrets that we could potentially uncover.
We're pretty good at not revealing secrets until we want to.
So Ziggy, you want to kick this one off?
Yeah, well, firstly, I'm curious how you guys have been going since 2.0 release, which is obviously crazy. I remember you posting a thing of your sleeping schedule during the development for that, Chris. And you had a bit of a holiday afterwards, right, man?
Yeah, I went to Vegas with my wife, and that was pretty awesome. We've never been to Vegas before, so I really liked the city. There was so much good stuff to see.
Exactly how much time of that Vegas trip did you spend on your computer or phone on Reddit, though?
Well, the problem is, so Vegas is about eating, and there are buffets, and you have to stand in line for 45 minutes, so that's a perfect time to get caught up on emails, catch up on what's going on with the subreddit, see how the team is doing back home.
So you were efficiently holidaying while also responding to the community and not being on holiday.
Yeah, but it was really nice not having to actually do a lot of work during that time.
No cell phones allowed on the gambling floor, though, so can't gamble and freaking check your phone at the same time either, so that's a good thing.
It was more about eating than gambling for me, though.
Did you guys mostly have much downtime after 2.0 or move straight into development for the next things?
Well, we had to pick the 2.0 release date in advance because of marketing stuff. So as you know, when it was initially released, there was some stuff we still wanted to finish. Notably, the Malachi fight in Act 4 had some improvements over the first couple of weeks. So basically, the guys just kept hammering on with that stuff right through the release date. And a few days before release, we locked in that as the version. And then on release day, we took the work from the last few days and released that, and so on and so on. basically just iterating on Act 4 during the launch period, and they were able to get a bit more downtime after that once we got the initial problems out of the way. But there's been a lot of stuff that we've been working on since then that's pretty interesting.
Okay. Alrighty, thanks guys. So I remember you guys saying that 2.0 is supposed to be a bit of a kind of a fresh start for racing, and you did kick off the new kind of like themed racing seasons and things like that. So I want to get a bit of a context on kind of what's the core goals for you guys as far as racing as a game feature. Like what is it that you really want racing to achieve? I think it's something that I guess there hasn't been quite as much communication on exactly what you guys are trying to do with racing.
We started racing off as just an experiment many years ago, where we tried some events because people really responded well to the beginnings of new leagues, and it took off as a thing that people loved doing. It basically made your skill at running through Path of Exile be a thing that could be measured. So we created seasons with it as a way of codifying that, and we don't make any money off racing, right? There's no entry fees. That's been discussed. It was rejected. We want to keep this kind of stuff as a fun thing people can do without having to pay. And so it's one of those things we do just because it's cool, right? Like, it might make people play the game longer maybe if it's good, but we've typically found that it's been a cool niche part of Path of Exile, and one of the topics that Carl and I and the rest of the team have been discussing recently is how can we grow that to become slightly more than a niche part of Path of Exile. Yeah, that's kind of, I think, what a lot of us feel is that racing could be a lot more than it is. I think one of Path of Exile's core potential features, like something that is huge for the game and will do a lot for keeping the community around and keeping people engaged beyond when they would normally, stop playing and things like that. So, what, I guess then, from your guys' perspective, since you have all the sets that we don't have, and we kind of just guesstimate based on, well, me and 5 of my friends don't race or feel this way. What do you guys see as how many people are engaged in racing at the moment?
So when we look at the sort of levels that people get involved in racing, there's sort of 2 general things we look at. We look at basically the raw numbers racing, which is usually a lot stronger at the beginning of the season, then it sort of drops away a bit. And then we look at the people sort of engaged in the sort of the serious racing, getting points and trying to do well, and
the signature race stuff.
Yeah, the signature race kind of stuff. So at the moment, whenever we've got new players come in, which is usually at the beginning of expansions, but this for 2.0 we've actually had a good amount of new players coming in throughout. They usually try racing and they usually quite enjoy racing. At the moment, the main thing that worries us is there's not a lot of growth with the competitive racing. So there's not sort of a path from I'm casually racing, what do I do next if I want to get serious? Partially this is because the level of competition has risen so high, it's quite hard for people to imagine how they get to that level of competition. So that's definitely a thing we're keen to look at and see what we can do with it.
Go ahead. Do you guys foresee yourself, with a bunch of new players coming in, the competition still being the same and consistently getting better? Do you see yourselves making more new races in the future to maybe help out with this, or do you still think the competition would still be very good at these new races regardless?
We're certainly planning to add new race types. There's quite a lot of interesting ideas there, but part of the issue is that there are people here with years and years of experience in racing, and so it's intimidating for new players when they see, they race and they get to level 20 and there's some guy at 35 in the same time frame.
I think the difference between being a casual racer as well, because I think everyone that I encourage to get in and racing, I'm like, guys, get in and play this race. It's going to be a lot of fun. This exiles every race. Get in and play this. Endless Ledge is fun, man. And everyone who comes back and tries it, and they're like, hey, Ziggy, I tried my first ever race. It was really fun. I pretty much always get positive kind of feedback from people who try races. But I think the distance, I guess the perceived distance from that to, I'm competing in racing is a big jump. Not so much in each individual race. It's pretty easy to see how you might, place a little bit higher within that race. But then how do you be competitive in an overall season? That seems like such a wide gap.
Yeah, there's also, we don't currently have much between, we knew we needed casual races and we knew we needed the serious competitive races, but there's not really a path between them. The sort of the signature is now the sole super competitive race.
So one of the things I wanted to bring up was rewards. Rewards is something that has been brought up a lot now by the community, and I'm not sure how the whole community feels about it, but I wouldn't say majority, but a bunch of people has said that the rewards this go around have seemed a little bit lackluster, or there's just not as many. What reward structures have worked well for you guys in the past?
We typically find that the one that's most effective is probably the random door prizes thing. The fact that you can win some, 1, 0, 2 uniques for entering a race if you're lucky. People don't know how many are given out, but it's a fairly generous amount. And occasionally receiving those helps you really feel like you want to play more races, because you're essentially getting, a lottery card each time you do. This is something like rewards is a topic Path of Exile wide that we've been talking about recently. As you noticed, we increased unique item drops a few months ago by a fair amount. We've redesigned how challenge leagues work so that they're more rewarding earlier, and this racing hasn't been immune from this. We've had some big discussions, and basically we feel giving up more rewards and a more generous schedule is probably better. But it's worth noting there are negative sides to rewards as well, right? Like, there are two types of rewards you can give out. You can give out functional, as in unique items, or non-functional, as in microtransactions, and they both come with their costs. If you're too generous with giving out uniques for races, then it starts to affect the economy, right? Those items become worth nothing, or you feel you must race in order to get the stuff that everyone else has. And likewise, if you're too generous giving out microtransactions, then we can't pay for server costs because we just gave away the stuff we're selling. So we have to be very careful with rewards to pitch the right points so that people engage with the systems, but also to make sure that the game is still fun because there's scarcity in items, and also that there's scarcity in microtransactions, so people occasionally have to give us some cash.
I'm kind of surprised that you guys did mention in the recent manifesto that you were considering doing more of a reward system similar to what you've done with the 1 month races in the challenge leagues, especially given that cosmetic rewards that you guys give away does tread on the toes of your monetization.
Right.
So is that then something you're considering for racing, or you think would be kind of too far there?
Well, something that's important to note that I think we didn't say in the manifesto post was that when we're giving out cosmetic rewards for challenge leagues, the intention is that it's a special set of microtransactions created to commemorate that challenge league, in its theme, that's only available during the challenge league, but that we also sell that set or a variation of it at the same time. So players can get it for free, but it's not meant to be exclusive to the people who earned it, because that there is something that would hurt the monetization pretty hard. So the goal is that you can either pay for it or you can earn it during that period. Now, there might be differences between the two versions, right? We're not entirely sure yet, because that's sorted out closer to the league. But the intention there is that we try not to tread on our monetization toes too much, which is kind of one of the caveats of us giving out microtransactions, is we have to make sure there's also a way to sell similar or the same microtransactions.
I will say with the 1 month races, you guys have done a great job with the Seraph scat. Like reskinning it. It's like, it has that impact where you want to play the 1 month, but you still have other variations of the set to get. And I really do appreciate you guys doing those for the 1 month. And a lot of people seem to like it. On that same topic, a lot of rewards that we do get, the alternate art type rewards, I personally still haven't taken out a bunch of mine, because once I take it out, that's it, and then it's only in that temporary league. I remember on episode 20, Chris, I asked you if maybe in the future, have you guys considered at all making it so that once you have a race reward that you might be able to turn into a cosmetic microtransaction at some point in time and use it on future temporary leagues once you've removed it?
Okay, this is Carl here. One thing we are considering doing is selling a microtransaction that would make a skin transfer of an item.
Like a permanent one.
Yeah, so then it becomes cross-league at that point, because you can say, I want this as a skin transfer. I will make this item a skin transfer, which I can then use in any league.
So one that you can't turn back into an item, essentially?
Right.
Yeah.
This has a couple of consequences. Firstly, it means that if you were unhappy that skin transfers were a consumable thing, you can have your permanent version and save money if your skin's transferring the same thing over and over and over. But the second thing is that it lets you, like at the moment everyone's hoarding their race uniques, waiting for a league where they can take them out and get both the skin and the actual ability to use them in game, to have an economic advantage. The intention here is that you would have the ability to take it out in a league, getting the advantage of being able to use the item in that league, but then knowing that in the future you're able to skin transfer it. So you still have the ability to get your unique at a certain point. And it's worth noting we've also been discussing, should we be drawing a line in the sand here and giving people notice that in the future they can't take out items from way in the past, because there is a kind of So here's the thing. We dislike pay to win because it lets someone get an advantage in an economy without having earned it in that economy, right? Cross-league trading is kind of like this. To use race rewards from the past at the 1 month mark is a very marginal advantage. It's something we don't generally care about, but it would be kind of cleaner not to. So we feel that it might be better to say, guys, hey, you should totally use your race rewards at some point, because in the future, some number of seasons down the track, you're not necessarily going to be able to pull these out in a new challenge league to help preserve its economy slightly.
Interesting. I think I like that idea a lot. Chat seems pretty keen on that idea of turning it into a permanent skin, and that allows you to take it out. So if you don't want to affect the economy in a challenge league, rather than doing this kind of 1 month delay where you can't really use your stuff, which I think is frustrating a lot of people and stopping them from racing, you could instead take it out in standard and instantly skin it and then start using it in the challenge league without having to wait that time to use what is essentially for you going to be a skin.
Yeah. And it would also mean you can use it on any other base type of that class. If you get a Bloodthorn staff skin, you can use it on your Terran Shiver, for example. You don't just have to run around holding a Bloodthorn.
Good stuff. Yeah, I think that could work.
So let's go a little bit more into the time and scheduling of racing. Something that's been brought up a lot has been asynchronous type racing. What are you guys' thoughts on that in general?
So to clarify here, we're defining asynchronous racing as the ability to enter a race when at a different time than other people are playing it.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
you can say, for example, today's Wednesday, today's race is the Endless Ledge, and you can play any time during the day as long as you complete it at some stage. So the community has been asking about this for a very long time, and we like the idea, and honestly, we're working on getting this in. Having said that, that doesn't mean the next race season will necessarily have this, right? Like the next race season, is mostly designed, and these features take some time to implement. Maybe it's not in the one after that either, but it is something that we're working on for the next race season that we can fit it into, at least as a test.
All right, so it's definitely something that we're looking to in the future, because right now it seems like the time commitments, a lot of people, the average player of Path of Exile has a full-time job, at least a part-time job. Some are family people, and they don't have the time to perform this. And, the whole Mario Kart racing against your ghost kind of thing, it just seems like a good idea and something I would love to see. In the event of, how long would these asynchronous type races go? Is it the whole day, or is it over an 8-hour time frame? Have you guys decided any of that kind of stuff yet?
We haven't locked it in, but it's very likely to be a day. It's easy to explain a schedule where Monday is this race, Tuesday is this one. But it's worth noting that you can still, within the schedule, fit regular races too, right? Like if you have a signature event, you kind of want that one to start with a gunshot and to finish with a finish line that everyone has to cross, if you see what I mean.
Correct.
And party events, for example, they don't work asynchronously because you can, unless you put every party in a bubble, essentially, but you don't want it so it's just an open economy where you can join elite parties, because then the person that wins is the person that had all the handed down gear from the last 20 hours of play.
Yeah, that would be problematic.
So we have considered these things.
Okay, do you think that it would be a good idea then to have less races once you had asynchronous racing, so that you could have your endless ledge for that day rather than running several over the course of different time zones? Because I think something a lot of people mention with scheduling is that to achieve the mid-tier rewards, or to get all the way up to the 500 point reward, they need to compete in every race, which means waking up at 3 a.m. and things like that. Would you have less and more rewarding races, or sort of keep the same amount of races but just have one that you could enter each day?
Certainly, if we have, any time you go on, there is a sort of a day race, and there might be some other specific races. We would probably, in that day, there would be that one race that sort of covers the 24-hour period, and maybe something else. So that would obviously be fewer races. And because of that, when we do go to adding those kind of races, there would have to be a considerable change in how we structure sort of rewards basically from the ground up, which is another thing which may mean it's not in the next race season or potentially the one afterwards.
A nice thing about this is that it means that, so currently we say, because of time zones, we have to have a lot of races. And because there are a lot of races and we know the top people are going to compete in them, we have to have rewards that are very difficult to get to. Whereas here, if we say, look, there's a race every day, and then we can put something really decent for players to earn for just engaging with this, say, 20 or 25 days out of 30. If you can make it most of the time, and generally everyone has half an hour free somewhere in their day, whether it's in the morning before they go to work or sometime in the evening. Yeah. Giving them a reward for hitting most days in the month is a lot nicer than saying to them, look, you need to start setting alarms for 3 a.m. to get a good item from this.
Couldn't agree more.
Do you think that would bridge the gap between casual races and more competitive races a bit better then?
By hurting competitive races, maybe. Well, it's just one of those things where, in order to make racing bigger, it comes with compromises. And this is the kind of thing where competitive races are totally willing to get up in the middle of the night. And here you've taken away their ability to earn free bonus points that other people can't get. You're keeping them better than other players, but you're taking away the fact that the scores are 8 times higher because they do every single race.
One thing we've discussed with the daily races is it does give people the ability to practice and ability to like self-improve and time trial themselves. So if there is a race on that day, they can, test it and improve themselves within a race context. So it's also acts like a practice venue as well as being a competitive event.
Yeah, it also means that there will be someone who got the best time that day, and that person has competed at a high level, and maybe maybe we give out demis for the best person each day in each race, potentially.
Do you think then that the top races should be determined by getting up at 3 a.m. in the morning, or by more their skill in each individual race that they compete in, rather than how much they can dedicate?
Ideally by their skill, which is why we'd like to make this change. It's just worth noting at the moment a lot of their score doesn't necessarily come from the fact that they're getting double the score of the other players, but the fact that they're also doing 4 times as many races.
One thing that we've noticed is whatever we do, the people who are extremely competitive, they're going to find their way to succeed regardless of what the system is. So while we have to bear competitive races in mind, they are going to find their way to compete. Whereas the casual races, it's very important that we cater to them.
Yeah, the other thing is, of course, as racing becomes a larger part of Path of Exile, it's worth putting more resources into, right? So if you have a core niche community of dedicated competitive racers, they get seasons like we've been doing recently, where maybe there's some cool theme, maybe there is a unique item designed for that race season, but you don't generally get like a new descent or a new endless ledge very often. Whereas if it becomes a really big part of Path of Exile, where every day we're seeing tens of thousands of people engaging with the races, then of course it's worth our time to constantly be adding totally new types.
Okay. So that kind of then means that racing needs to be more beneficial to the game overall as well. And we were kind of talking about rewards a little bit. And I had this idea recently with the Gold Seraph skin that you're kind of providing like a base like suit of armor for your character. But then I'm like, now I want to get like golden footprints and a golden weapon effect and other accessories and things like that. Yeah. So that's kind of, it gives the opportunity to potentially, although racing itself doesn't make you guys money directly, because as you said, you didn't want to do entry fees or anything like that. If you were giving out certain cosmetic rewards, then you could have other things for sale that kind of linked together with that for people that wanted to, accessorize their outfit that they earned through the race season. Have you guys thought about that at all?
So fashionable, Ziggy.
I know, right?
Yeah, it's a nice synergy. I mean, the thing is, giving out these $40 armor sets is definitely a risk we take, right? Like, it could backfire, and exactly the set of people that were about to give us $40 instead earn it, and we don't get that money. But so far, it's looking pretty positive. People understand that it's best to support us, and they find other ways to do so, right? Maybe they buy more stash tabs instead. Maybe they buy the stuff that synergizes with the Seraph set, or maybe they say, I want to look different than everyone else and have boots that aren't yellow, and so they buy different ones.
Yeah, are you guys able to, how are you guys able to tell whether people, I know you can never really tell like someone's intentions and how they might have changed in reaction to something, but do you guys see like increased spending on more things around something once you start giving away some free MTXs, or do you see like less than what you would expect to be seeing?
It generally does cause people to buy more supplementary products because they both have money. Well, it's partly because they had money to spend on Path of Exile that they now don't need to spend on the armor set, so everything that isn't an armor set goes up. But it's probably also because they want something to go with their yellow armor set they just got.
Yeah, okay.
So it's not that like you guys are totally bleed out money when you do these. I'm actually glad to see the community still supporting MTXs during this kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, our community is amazing, and that's one of the reasons why we're here. And Path of Exile is going well because we have a lot of support from the community. Everything that's been given to us so far has been optional. Everyone could have enjoyed the game the same amount without ever having put any money in. But if that was the case, the servers would have shut down in early 2012, but they didn't.
Good.
Yeah, well, I think that's super important then, that if that is kind of the habit, and I guess you guys might want to test a little more into that, because if that is kind of like people's habits around you guys giving them MTXs, then that's something that could make racing more rewarding for you guys to develop and put more investment into. Because I'm always trying to think of it in terms of, how does this both reward the player base and the developers as well, keeping people engaged and buying MTXs and things like that.
Right. Well, another important aspect is that Path of Exile is a very cyclic game. As you know, we launch expansions and challenge leagues together, and a lot of people are super interested in the first couple of months after launch. And then, some number of months later, when we release more stuff, they come back and play that again. And the time that the players engage in that period varies from player to player. So you see more players at certain times than others, but having racing being a thing that's good any time, regardless of what's come out recently, means you can kind of mitigate this effect. You can have a more stable player base because people are enjoying racing, regardless of whether there's been an expansion that came out that month.
That's a really interesting topic, actually. And this is something I've spent a lot of time discussing myself as well. This idea of whether Path of Exile is a game you need to take breaks from, or whether you want people to be engaged in all the time. Because a lot of us take, we get into a bit more of a chill period. We either play some other games for a while, or we do some kind of more relaxed stuff for a bit, because Path of Exile is a pretty intense game, right? It's challenging and deep, and you have to kind of focus a lot on it. So there's this kind of like natural peaks at the start of a challenge league, and then a decline towards the end, and peak and decline. You've had that for a while now with challenge league system. Racing is the sort of system that allows people to, or encourages them to be more engaged more consistently over time, especially if you're kind of like either putting the seasons in the natural lulls, in those natural troughs. Do you guys think it's better to have people taking breaks, or is it better to keep people engaged all the time in the game? Like, do you guys kind of know anything about that? Whether it's you see people getting more burned down if they're always engaged, or I don't know. I'm curious your guys' perspective on that. We
don't really have any data on that particular thing, but we're trying to release more and better content as often as we can, right? Like, we don't want to have these periods where a year goes by and nothing happens in Path of Exile. So we will continue to push on the the speed and the power behind the stuff that we release, and adding racing is a thing for people to do at any time in Path of Exile. While it may burn people out, it's up to them whether they play. They can take breaks, and maybe that's why having them structured in seasons is a good idea.
I say racing is a pretty a restful thing. It's the sort of thing I can do when I'm taking a bit of a break from going super hard in a core season. So I'm wondering how much that applies to other people as well, because I kind of want there to be a race season going when I'm otherwise tired out from the core game, so I can jump in and do an hour or half an hour here, still get my PoE fix without needing to be super involved.
One thing we've certainly discussed as well is making sure that if you join a race season in the middle, or just a time that suits you, that you don't feel like you've missed out or you've been cut out from the rewards. So there needs to be something for players who do sort of come in at mid-season. For example, recently with the boss kill events, we added points for the bosses before the final one, and we find that actually got a slight uptick in people competing there, because they realize, well, I don't have to go finish the event, I can just sort of do the beginning of it. But we want that if you suddenly go, hey, there's this race thing, I want to engage with it, that immediately there's something you can sort of say, oh yeah, it's worth me doing this, even though I've come into the season right towards the end.
How do you guys feel about the point structure of rewards at the moment then, with how you guys have changed it recently, and having, I guess, less, and it being quite hard to reach the 500 points tier?
We've done a lot of internal talking about this recently. Carl, how much do you reckon we should say about this?
So yeah, we've discussed points quite a lot, and what works and what doesn't. In general, we're going to look at the level points and make them easier to get. So even in the very next race season, we're going to base the top level points on the worst performing class. Now, ideally, we want to sort of adjust balance as well, so that there's not a large gap between the worst performing class and the best performing class. But basically, for the level rewards, that they're sort of tagged to whatever class is doing the worst for that kind of race. So that reduces what you need to do to get into that, and also makes people feel less penalized for playing what they might perceive as sort of the wrong class to choose for a particular kind of race, while still yet leaving the placement points sort of where they are, which will sort of increase the points. And we're looking at making it easier to sort of get some of the objective threshold stuff, and really pushing some of the objective threshold. So it gives you a sense of progress, so that there's not like I get some points for competing and beyond that I've got to do really well to get more points, so that there's more sort of reward for getting better and better at races. So there's been a lot of discussion about that.
Which will be going into the next season, I believe, right?
Yes, that'll be going in next
season.
So
it's worth stressing, most of the race improvements we want to make, and we have a big plan here, some of which we can't talk about, but most of those aren't going into the very next season that starts, because they take some time to make. And I would expect that most of these improvements are Q1 next year, or maybe early, but probably, not in the next couple of months, because they take some time to get asynchronous racing set up and so on and so on. Right. But as things are ready, we'll put them in seasons. Like, our plan is not to just sit there doing what we're currently doing for months and then release it all in one go. We'd like to just get things in for people to test. And the points changes that Carl was discussing are good to go for the next season.
Yeah, we do have a small list of things that sort of will be happening in the next season, if you want us to quickly run through it.
Yeah, that was my question I was going to fire off to you guys. What improvements will we be seeing in the next race season? Anything you can disclose?
So the first important thing to note is we're planning to improve communication in general about racing. Hopefully you've noticed we've had quite a push on communication in general, keeping the community up to date and discussing sort of stuff quite openly about where sort of our internal discussions are at. So this will include manifestos, and we want to solicit more player feedback and make sure the race stuff is covered in the news as well. So how do you feel about the manifesto posts we've been doing sort of aside from races so far?
Honestly, that last one, with the Challenge League one, was super on point. I thought it did a really good job of communicating how you guys look at past things. I certainly agree with a lot of your decisions made in the context of what you've learned from past seasons, and then the changes you've made from those. That was awesome. I'd love to see more communication like that for racing.
It's refreshing when a company's willing to admit things that they messed up on, mistakes they learned from, and I would love to see that when it comes to racing too, honestly.
Okay. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to say for all events, you get points for dead characters regardless. So you're always rewarded for continuing to race, and you're safe in the knowledge that when your character dies, you've still sort of earned whatever points you've got up to that point. So that's on for a lot of races already, but we're sort of going to extend that to all races.
This is a big deal for me personally, because back when I was racing, I would get to the 3 or 4 point threshold because that's what I know I can comfortably do. And then if I pushed ahead, I'd die and lose the points. Now I know I can push ahead. And I'm super casual as far as racing goes. I mean, Yeah.
After a lot of discussion about whether we'd run non-hardcore ones, we're actually going to settle on doing hardcore events. We did discuss doing standard races as well, but we're not planning to do that. So there'll always be a risk of death in races, and we think that's sort of one of the things that makes it a bit special.
That's an interesting because there's a bit of a trade-off. Like when you have that, you can keep your points when you die. You can YOLO a bit harder. You can push a bit harder, and I do like that in Endless Ledge and Descent and that sort of thing, where you do get to keep those points. But you're still risking something if you do happen to go too hard in the last 5 minutes and you lose those last 5 minutes because you die early. Then if you are competing, so I'm wondering if this will hurt competitive play. But I don't think it would, because if you die 5 minutes early and you went a bit harder, then that was a part of the strategy, right? You had to make sure that you going a bit harder made up for that 5 minutes that you potentially lost.
Risky for a biscuit, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, another thing we've discussed in detail is, and we got a lot of requests to change things in the game specifically for races. So we're certainly going to look at things that would improve races. Like we often get requests for rings in the vendors that sometimes are random, sometimes aren't, but we've decided we're not going to do those changes unless they also improve the game. Now, handily, initially the reason we had races was to improve the game, and if a race thing does highlight a thing that needs to be improved in the early game, we'll certainly do it. But that was just sort of a policy thing we had, as particularly for races that start at the beginning of the game. Changes we're going to do for classes and the vendors and randomness, we're basically going to do them if they also improve the game that's not a race, if that makes sense.
So something I want to talk to you guys about, like racing types in general. Generally speaking, in a season, we'll have like Descent Champions, Endless Ledge, the non-core type races. But rarely do we actually have all three of them together. What is the reasoning behind this?
So we have found that if you don't have a race available for a period of time, it does sort of heighten interest in it, and it also allows us a bit of time to sort of look at what we need to change. Now, I do have a list of changes for Endless Ledge and Descent Champions that are coming up.
Maybe we should make a manifesto post about the details of those.
We could. That might be the easier way to handle it. The other thing we noted about Endless Ledge and Descent is they were we kind of missed the days where we sort of put out these new race types. So that's certainly something we're going to explore, not necessarily always as fully fledged as, like, say, Descent Champions, but certainly looking at new options, different start points, potentially different sort of level arrangements and that kind of thing. So, I mean, Endless Ledge was interesting in that it was quite a big hit with some players. And realistically, it wasn't that much work for us to do, so I think we may have coasted a little bit on races, and we'll make sure we'll, really stick some effort in there.
Cool.
Go ahead, Ziggy.
Well, on that topic then, something that people have been kind of like pretty keen on for a while now is the idea of I guess accelerated start races, as in you start at level 30 or you start at a later point in the game. Because I think most people can agree that Path of Exile is at its strongest later in the game. That's when you get to start to experience, what are some of the core strengths of the game, such as like customization and things like that. When everyone's starting at level 1, there's not too much difference, but you get more chance to, I guess, show off your customization skills when you're starting at a higher level or at a later point in the game. And
So
the game's a little bit faster, more exciting. Is that something that you guys have thought about then?
It's one of those things that we'd love to try, but because it requires some tooling to make it so that you can start later in the game, from a quest state point of view and so on, and there's questions about what items you have and such. It's probably early next year rather than late this year that we'll be getting that one in, but there's a ton of different options that are opened up, and there's discussion of making it so that the guys can just string together areas. Like, imagine if you can just arbitrarily name some world areas and they don't have quests in them and they're concatenated together, and that's like a custom race, like Descent basically, and the developers can just come up with a few of those every month or whatever. I mean, this is kind of, a bit fantasy at the moment, but there's a lot of stuff we could do with racing if we put the work into improving the tools that the developers have to use when creating the races.
Awesome, that's super exciting. So you pretty much said then that it's something you guys are really looking at then, this idea of like later start races and stuff like that. Because I think that'll be a huge deal. I think a lot of people just really dislike the idea of restarting at level 1, or they hate the first part of the game, and that's why they don't race. I get that from a lot of people. That's like the core reason they don't race.
Well, we'll have a lot more variety for them.
Excellent.
It's going to be good. Though, as I mentioned, there's stuff here staggered over quite some period of time, but we're expecting to make some pretty impactful changes, at least to numeric values and so on, in the next season, and then we'll get feedback on how well that's doing. And I think, Sorry, go on.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask if we covered everything on our list, but if you have a question, that should trump it.
I was gonna say that if you guys can kind of string zones randomly together and stuff, you can start to do some kind of pretty creative, entertaining themed ideas. Like you could do successive boss fights right next to each other, or you could work your way backwards through the game, or there's some pretty like crazy sort of race types that you could come up with that would just be reutilizing existing content, like Endless Ledge.
At the moment, the game has lots and lots of scripted questy stuff that occurs at specific points, so it takes a bit of an overhaul to get it so you can play those areas without that stuff triggering. There's stuff that, like, if you find your way into an area you're not meant to be and you try to go out of the area, it will say you don't have the quest state to do this. You haven't killed Brutus, how the hell are you in this area? And that kind of stuff. So it really does check to make sure people aren't exploiting, and because of that, we'd have to kind of strip that out for racing if we're doing ad hoc races.
As you mentioned, Endless Ledge, we'll quickly discuss a couple of the changes we're doing to that. So one, we're going to sort of ramp up the monster types early in Endless Ledge to give people a bit more of sort of an in before we suddenly drop you in the hardest monsters by randomness in the second area.
So it needs no Act 4 monsters in Area 2.
No more dischargers.
The other thing we're doing is we're going to add support gem chests in. We're not exactly sure of all the details yet, but it has been worked on. So while I do enjoy the fact that there's a certain amount of doing what you can in Endless Ledge based on what you get, because in the core game we drop supports to being quite a lot lower level. Endless Ledge does need that sort of gem support much more than it used to. So we're going to make sure that's supported with some chests that will pop out a few support gems as you play.
When you're playing Endless Ledge and you get up to like, you just get one random support gem drop that's perfect. You're like, oh my god, I'm going to crush
additional accuracy, man. Always additional accuracy.
It doesn't cost any extra mana. It's fine.
It doesn't do anything either.
There's been discussion about adding some aqueduct tile set areas to the Endless Ledge could be pretty cool as well.
Sweet.
Oh, awesome.
Love it. Love that zone. Day and night. Give us a bit of both. I love it. Looks so good today.
One other thing we've been discussing for Endless Ledge, but this is a little bit harder for us to do, is doing party support for Endless Ledges. So you get into your party and then you're running the Endless Ledge as a party.
Before we go into the non-racing discussion of this podcast, we're about halfway through now. Is there anything you guys would like to disclose that might be coming out in the near future that you can kind of like hype up everyone in the audience right now with?
With regard to racing?
Yeah.
Well, part of what we want to communicate here is there's lots of very cool stuff coming. In fact, some stuff that's so cool that we decided not to discuss it in the podcast because we want to surprise people. But that's kind of coming a couple of seasons from now.
Oh, one thing I will quickly mention, Ship Graveyard. And this is not so much as an exciting thing, but it's been a pain point for a few players. We're looking at the various variations of the Ship Graveyard.
The layouts of that zone?
Because some are a lot faster than others.
Yeah, so
all over the place.
We still think variance is good, and this is exactly a thing where, as well, it sort of highlights a thing about the core game as well. So looking at the Ship Graveyard variations and making sure, while there's still a lot of variance, there's still, good variance. It is an important thing, so that should sort of remove some pain there.
Right.
Is it just my imagination, or is that the most varied zone of the game? Like, is that
used
most
to be.
variance?
Before it was you just follow the water and you get to the next zone, and then 2.0 it changed completely.
Here's the thing. We're more inclined to like the harder variations than the incredibly trivial ones, but the problem is that there is high variance there, which means that some players just get a complete cakewalk through that area. But the guys are aware of this and looking into it.
Good.
Yeah. We kind of want to communicate with racing that you shouldn't look at the next season and judge the changes based on that, because only some of the ones are getting into the next season, then some more into the season after that, and hopefully within a few seasons everything is released. We prefer the idea of ramping it up and getting testing on them, rather than just going completely silent, making you think we abandoned racing, and then dropping an incredibly new system on you at the point where no one cares anymore.
So you guys mentioned communication was going to be a pretty big point moving forwards with manifestos and stuff like that. I think that's going to be one of the biggest things, is just kind of getting your perspective, because I feel like on racing that we just haven't heard from you guys in a while about what you guys expect from racing or want to see. So I think this podcast has been pretty awesome for that. My kind of final question for racing then, I think, if we're pretty much ready to wrap up, is supporting racing a bit more on the spectator side, because I think racing is very entertaining to watch. At the moment, the only thing you could really do is watch someone who's racing in first-person sort of perspective. This is a pretty long-term thing, but are you guys thinking about the potential of supporting racing more from a spectator point of view? I don't want to throw around esports or anything, but I think there's a lot of potential for people to get behind and more interested in racings if they can see more people racing, and maybe having other people who aren't racing casting people that are racing.
So, back in the day, when we implemented Path of Exile, we had a decision on how to do the networking model, and we went with the one which had predictive mode, as you know. And one of the drawbacks of this is that we weren't able to do in-client spectating, because essentially it could get out of sync, right? You could be watching one thing, and then the guy gets stuck behind a rock on your screen, but not on his, and then the experience is ruined. And because players can work around desync by just, noting that they're desynced and clicking to fix it or whatever, you couldn't do that as a spectator. So we kind of had to write off the concept of in-client spectating. Until all the lockstep changes, which basically made it so that, while not particularly easy, is certainly a thing we can do, and probably will at some stage. So this gives us the ability to potentially stream what someone is doing to another player so that you can watch them. And this has a number of things we could do. For starters, we could, admittedly this is not something we intend to do at the moment, but in the future we could add the ability for you to watch another player play in the game client. But more importantly, we could allow people who shoutcast stuff to be able to spectate. So, for example, if you say, hey, look, I want to do some racing commentary, then we could hook you up with the ability to watch people in a specific race playing and switch between them.
That would be so good.
Having it so that an individual person can do this, like a trusted community member, A, removes some of the secrecy concerns, because we can supervise it to make sure they're only watching the people they're meant to, and B, it means there's no need for a complicated in-game user interface related to it. So that's certainly a lot easier than making it so there's a massive, in-game, streaming thing built in.
That is freaking awesome. Now that's what I want to hear. Thank you, Lockstep.
That would like grow, I think, racing and the community surrounding racing, and also like the Twitch and YouTube community around the game so much, I think, because I like my race videos. I'm not even close to being a top racer. My race videos do exceptionally well. People love them, man. People love watching them. So awesome. Having the ability to cast like top racers would be insanely good.
So this spectating stuff, it's advanced enough that it didn't make it onto the list of stuff we're doing by Q1 next year. Now maybe we'll get it in there, especially if it's worthwhile.
Yeah,
it's just that this requires core resources, in particular Jonathan. And Jonathan's the guy who fixes desync and does trading stuff and core things like that, right? Like Jonathan time is the most expensive time we have in terms of what it buys for the company. So that requires a lot of Jonathan time to get this sorted out. So it has to be offset against other big things.
I like that. Jonathan time is the most expensive. Whenever something's like super valuable time, that's Jonathan time.
Yeah.
So that concludes our racing discussion.
Thank you, guys. Very exciting stuff.
We're going to move into the non-racing discussions. In specific, we have some challenge league discussion, in specific the recent manifesto, and maybe what's to come, the hardcore versus softcore, how they might bounce off of each other. Map changes, divination cards, and then what is to be expected at the end of the 1 month. So let's kick things off. You guys just recently put out a manifesto discussing all the previous leagues and what's to come in the next challenge league. And you guys said that the hardcore and the softcore challenge league will be similar but not 100% the same. Would you like to go into detail on this at all, if you can at all, Chris?
Here's an example. For starters, I can't talk about the nature of the challenge league. I tried to get permission. I thought it would be totally cool to reveal it here, but no one's keen. They want more time to actually, to make it awesome. So
fair enough.
Here's an example. Imagine that you were running Torment, but there were a different set of tormented spirits in the two leagues, right? They're mostly the same, but there are some that are specific. We're doing that, but with items instead. So there are reasons to play both if you really care about getting everything. But in general, it required one set of development time in order to create it, which is the key thing, because that lets us have a team focused on just making this one league amazing for a long period of time, as opposed to having the team split between two leagues.
Such a good decision, I think. I did a poll on my stream for the decision to make it hardcore, softcore for the same league, and I think it was pretty much 100% people in favor of that idea, because everyone feels like they're missing out all the time. Most of us only play one of the challenge leagues, I think. I'm guessing your guys' data supported that, right?
Yeah, especially when surveying people, we found that they would say things like, I really wanted to play Tempest, but it was the hardcore league. Or, man, Warbound sounded fun, look at all those cool exclusive items, except I'd have to play Scrubcore, as they said. That's not the term we use.
Scrubcore from Chris Wilson. Well.
Confirmed. Oh, God. This is like legal PV penis all over again.
Number one quote from this podcast. Perfect.
No, something I want to talk about is with Torment and Warbands, you guys said you didn't want to put them into the core of the game. I felt that Tempest and Warbands. I felt Tempest was actually really, really well designed in maps. And I was kind of surprised when you guys said you wanted to implement Warbands more so than Tempest. What was the decision behind that, Chris?
So Tempest was my league, Warbands was someone else's, so I'm the most critical of Tempest, and I feel that league being very fatiguing outside of maps is a big problem, right? Like, upon actually playing real characters in it once the game is released, it's one of those things that really dominates your play. And when you're releasing a big expansion where you need new and returning players to be able to play through the game, many of whom enjoy playing hardcore modes or feel that they're obliged to because, popular streamers do, then it's a very kind of in-your-face league mechanic. And it was designed to be awesome in maps. It's just that we'd prefer to cut it up into lots of little Tempest stuff that goes into the game, rather than just say the concept of Tempests changing every hour is being kept. Because that bit there is kind of not being kept, whereas our favorite Tempests are.
I'm kind of I did quite like Tempest, and I even quite like Warbands, but I'm kind of glad that overall mechanic isn't making it to the core game, because I think it's a bit like, I'm realizing with how intrusive Beyond is, that stuff that's super, super present and intrusive, I don't think is really cool for the core game. Like,
Yeah.
I'm loathing Beyond at the moment in the 1 month, because of just how ever-present it is, and I feel like Tempest and Warbands have had the risk of that as well.
Yeah, I should have mentioned in the manifesto that Beyond is very fatiguing as well, from the point of view that it's always there, it's always on your mind. It's meant to be a thing you fear a bit, but fearing for something for months on end is probably not cool.
There's certain kind of mechanics that become more popular the more distant they are from players, and you can't leave them all on all the time. A good example is kind of invasion bosses, where the longer it's on, the more people complain about them and the more upset they get about the small details. But as we've noticed, when they come back for a brief period, we suddenly get players going, these are awesome, they should be on all the time. And in fact, someone did a poll which said, like, a huge number of people said they should be on all the time. But we know from experience, if we do leave something like that on all the time, it sort of turns a bit more negative over time, and it's sort of best as an occasional treat rather than on always all the time.
Yeah.
Invasion bosses are one of those things, though. When they first came out, they were so hard, and then the patch came, like the post nerf invasion boss patch. I felt it was needed, and that was one of the most fun moments I had in Path of Exile. And Tempest mapping was really, really fun to me too. And if we can have instances where those could be on all the time in specific time frames, maybe maps, rather than leveling, I think it would be a lot better, because then, you know, the average player is always going to make new characters and keep playing this game. So you won't always see Invasion, you won't always see Tempest, but in maps it could be refreshing to see that. Something I wanted to discuss is why Beyond bosses or Beyond mobs or Warband monsters, why don't they drop maps? Before in Beyond League we were getting maps a lot more, and where did that decision come from?
So when we looked at where maps were coming from, there was so many more of the mapping sort of economy was being based on things that people were basically being forced to do. So during mapping, there was a sort of a period where everyone was going double beyond. It was the only way to get ahead, and a lot of players didn't want to do sort of double beyond maps. So it was more sort of a decision to keep it sort of locked down into the sort of the core element of the map, and to sort of double down on the boss of the map. So we did a lot of playing with maps and trying to sort of work out where they come from and how available they should be.
And do you think it might be something you might incorporate back into the game? Because I can understand when people just constantly rolling for Beyond, you know, going for maps, and you want to try and take that away. But there's something about killing a Beyond boss and knowing I'm not going to get a map versus killing something like the Plateau boss, which is just Uzbek, you know? And then I could double down and get a +2 map. It just seems silly, because it's like you have to put a lot more effort to kill a Beyond boss. It should be more rewarding than killing Uzbek, for example.
It's certainly something we can look at in the future, but the sort of the reflexive nature of maps is something we want to focus on, maps being about maps. Now at the moment, hopefully you find, aside from this map issue, Beyond bosses are rewarding. At least I hope you find they're rewarding. And as well as that, Beyond bosses are also rewarding for the challenge. This is something that players really do appreciate. It's kind of special where you get a Beyond boss, and if it's really hard.
Mm-hmm. It always seems silly, you know. I can spend 5 minutes killing Abexoth and get nothing, but you know, here's Uzbek. Oh, cool! Got a 79 map.
I think it depends on what you're looking for out of the reward structure, whether you're looking for other loot or maps, though. Because I think it's okay to have mechanics in maps that don't reward maps specifically, but reward in other areas, currency and loot and things like that, which you can always funnel back into maps.
Yep.
Yeah, I think you'll find that Abexoth does drop some items.
Oh yeah, that's for sure.
And what this tells me is that we've got to look at the boss in this particular case. Is, you know, that's the thing to look at. That being said, we don't want to sort of block people hard from completing the boss, depending on the map level. I mean, if it's a tier 14 map, we're probably out to kill you. But we've certainly looked at the bosses and gone, oh, the bosses at, you know, some tiers, like tier 7, they're not really appreciated. That there's quite a hard set for the entire tier. So we're looking at that, where some map bosses are too easy or not interesting enough, so they don't feel rewarding. Generally, we find if a fight is interesting and people feel challenged, they actually value it a lot more.
In the recent map changes, you guys said that you were doing some rebalancing of difficulty in lower tier maps. What was that in particular? Because I thought it was going to be like the new Act 4 map tileset bosses, in particular, like the Night Wayne or Night Vane or whoever he is, the
Desert
Archer
boss.
guy. Yeah, the Desert Boss.
So there are some changes coming to Night Vane in the future, which mostly around the sort of life they've got. But what it was is looking at the amount of physical damage in maps, and it was certainly an obstacle for some players. We generally find, I mean, you guys are sort of way ahead of the curve, right? You're sort of well into maps, but definitely high physical damage was an issue. So there were some slight adjustments to sort of just general monster damage in maps.
Okay.
And we have noticed that's made a difference. We are doing more with maps. Like I said, there's this particular tier where the combination of bosses and just sort of the map design was kind of like a bad tier. So we're doing a lot of work on evening that out as well.
That Desert Boss, though. So hilarious.
Something I want to talk about with maps in specific. So the map tier system is something that's completely changed overall, and this was a good 1 month to test that. I'm all for the low, mid, and high tier, separating them with colors and things like that. I really like that. Though I feel the tier 1 through tier, 15, it just seems really confusing to me, because it's like I still end up saying, well, I'm in a 68 map or tier 1, but isn't tier 1 supposed to be the best, so why isn't that an 82 map? It just seems confusing, and I was just wondering your thought process behind the whole tier thing.
We've been calling them tiers forever internally, right?
Really?
Like the Divination card creation page referred to tier 15 as the highest one months before this change. You know, like they are tiers as far as we're concerned, and we've been regretting every day the fact we set map level on them, because I mean, when we change the map level, people get confused. Now there's a 70 and a 72 version of the same thing and so on.
We do appreciate this is mostly confusing for players who are very heavily invested in mapping and understanding the mapping inside and out. But we've actually already found it better for players who haven't already engaged with maps so much. So I think our experienced mappers will get used to it. If they don't, we'll sort of know that over time. But I think this is a change that is for the better. And this 1 month has had like very good engagement with mapping. So when we looked at the stats for when most of these changes have sort of worked immediately, it did highlight where we needed to do more work. But I think in time you'll appreciate the tier change, but feel free to tell me in the future if that's wrong.
And there's still stuff we can fix, right? Like if someone brings up in chat, it doesn't say what tier it is on when you press tab to see the level of the area, right? It could say level 70 tier 3 very easily.
Yeah, that's my only criticism with it.
And there's problems with filtering in the stashes where we need to make that clearer, so you can go tier 5. You know, I mean, there's stuff that could make it easier, and we will make that. We're not sticking to our guns to the point where we say we won't touch it again, you know.
The point of the tier system, right, is to communicate that it's a different system to like the zone levels as you're moving through the game, right? You're a level 60 character in a level 60 zone level, you know, that's probably about right. But once you move into end game, the map system is like a separate entirely system. So the tier, I think the tier system is supposed to make that obvious rather than being like, well, you're in a 67 zone before and here's a 68 map, right? That's the next step.
So it's important to look at like old school RPGs. I'm going to use Diablo 2 as an obvious example. When you're grinding in the high 90s in that game, you're generally grinding in a level 90-ish area, like River of Flames, 88 or 89 or 90 or something like that. You're higher than the monsters, you're getting an experience penalty, and there's hardcore diminishing returns. Whereas when you're in World of Warcraft or another contemporary MMO, you want to be fighting monsters of around your level. So people have been trained over the last decade that you really want to be fighting monsters of your level, and that causes them to feel bad in Path of Exile if they're playing a 77 map or whatever as a level 95 character and feeling that they're not playing content that's appropriate for their level. And so the tiers thing helps mention that these are like, you know, bad example, but they're like Greater Rifts where there's a number behind them where who knows what the number means, but bigger is harder.
So this is the only thing, because I think I like the change overall, and I think it'll help perceptions and understanding the map system, especially for newer players. But did you guys consider at all how the community already uses the tier naming convention, as in tier 1 affix being the best affix, and now we have tier 1 mapping the lowest map?
They were using it wrong though, like the term, like seriously. the fact that they had to
doesn't
go to
work
tier
that way,
0.
Chris.
The fact they were using tier 0 to describe something like, what happens if we introduce higher mods later, like a year from now? Are they tier -1? Like, everyone gets confused.
It just moves. It just tier 1 shifts. I don't agree with the tier 0 thing, by the way. Just throwing that out there for the community.
So you've already got disagreement in your tiers. Your players are just so confusing with your mod tiers.
But it doesn't matter if you think it's wrong. It doesn't matter.
That's right.
People will get used to it. This is ripping the band-aid off. Well-established tiers as a thing where you can add more on the top. You know, the phrase higher tier means better or bigger, right? You know, you wouldn't say I have a lower tier vehicle now as you get a better one. So we're trying to establish tiers go up, and maybe we describe the affixes as rank 1, meaning, I don't know, you guys can work it out.
I also think people will happily have the maps go up and the mod tiers go down. I mean, someone suggested that level's much less confusing, but I don't know if you've noticed how many things have level.
Yeah, I think level's confusing.
Like gems already have 2 different levels on them, and they're not less confusing because of it.
I mean, imagine an item level 77, map level 73, level 7 map, right?
Yeah.
Jeez,
Well played, Chris. Last thing I want to talk about with the tier changes coming up. Zana right now, when she gives you a mission from your hideout, it's a little bit lower level. But at the same time, Zana can also offer you, let's say, a tropical island that's level 77. With this new tier system, will we be able to? Is tropical island always going to be locked into a tier 1 slot, or guys, have you thought about maybe opening up maps like that to be in other tier spots?
It's certainly something we've discussed, but I don't think it'll be something we're doing, not certainly on the short term. And specifically with Zana, she is giving you a map and then plussing or minusing it as a special feature. So we do have more ability with the naming with the tiers to mess around with level a bit more. But we also like the fact that as you're learning about maps, you start to sort of associate names with their difficulty. So if you suddenly fight a tropical island and then the next tropical island you fight, map you did was incredibly different, it's kind of a bad experience just as you're learning about maps.
Yeah, that's kind of like, because it's kind of the monster level's kind of like a hidden difficulty is what I'm trying to say. Like you don't really know how hard that monster's going to hit. So, but if you're used to, you know, this zone map, monsters hit this hard, but then later on they hit a lot harder. All of a sudden, that can be a bit hidden.
Yeah, there's other things related to this as well. Like I received an email of a person suggesting that we allow it for you to choose what tile set you're playing in for a given level. So you take your 77 map and it can be any tile set that you've unlocked so far potentially, because he argues you have to repeat the same maps quite a lot at the high tiers, even though this is a little less true these days. It would be great if you had the full choice to run anything in the game, then you wouldn't be repeating the maps. But no, you'd be repeating the best one. You'd be selecting repetitively the one that's marginally better for your build. You know, better layout, better boss, whatever it is, and now you'd be running exactly the same thing. You know, forever. We guarantee people would do that.
15 gorges.
This is one of these things where players will tend towards doing the same content over and over again and then not realize that that's what they're tiring about, whereas if they're sort of forced to mix it up a bit, players actually have a better time.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you guys about 2.0.4b coming out, the new patch. What's going on with it?
There's a few things, actually. We've got, Carl, I think you wanted to talk about some div card stuff in here, and then I'll talk about some performance stuff after that.
So the first thing I'll note is there's 8 new Divination cards coming already. But one thing we're adding in 2.04b is we're adding the tech so that we can have a Divination card drop from a specific boss. Or drop from a specific strongbox. So as well as that being a feature of a bunch of the new cards going in, there's a few old Divination cards which we're going to move to a boss in an area rather than an area specifically. Handily, I think these are ones people expect to drop from the boss already.
Do you want to give that a good example of it, or do you want to keep that as a secret for them? Because I know, you know, I'll just type it so the guys can't see.
Yeah, wow. So that's a good example.
Secret dev communications.
The Brittle Emperor, it's sort of, I think the first time that it did drop from from Vol, and that was a sort of an expectation that would be where it would drop from. So we do now have the tech to drop a div card from a boss or a strongbox and sort of give them a bit more of a sort of a special feeling or a special theming based on that.
So this means if you want a Vol's Devotion, Vol specifically is the place to get the cards, and we can put another card that's farmable on the Dried Lake, kind of doubling the farming stuff you're getting from that area.
Interesting. So that kind of makes it a bit more of a loot table system, even more so, rather than just being like a specific zone. We're going to have more actual bosses then.
And that would give us
For a
the
few
more...
cases.
Go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to say, in a few cases, yeah, we're doing this. Not unilaterally, of course. Like
Yeah,
everyone.
okay.
This brings back the hype behind D2, you know, farming Mephisto and farming specific bosses. I like that. That's a great change.
Cool. And strong boxes as well, he mentioned. There'll be, you know, this cards that only come from those, which is pretty cool.
And,
I missed that part. So there'll be some a specific card set or a few that only drop from certain strong boxes.
Yeah, now obviously as a strongbox is sort of a random occurrence, they're not the ones that kind of need to be on farm as such, but they are ones that are appropriate, and we also, for the strongbox case, we get to be fairly generous with them.
Is it Jack in a Box?
No, well, that does sound
Really?
somewhat appropriate now. You
That's pretty cool.
well, good job,
like,
Ziggy.
so
First
that
flame
would be-
totem, now Jack in the Box.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, remember when Ziggy nerfed Flame Totem? No, I hate that no one ever uses that anymore, right?
So Johnny has some more stuff from 204B.
Yes!
Sure.
Totally.
Okay, so we have some performance improvements. The first thing is that we've reduced the game's memory consumption and startup time by a bunch, 15% or so. So it uses less RAM, which means less weird issues on 32-bit computers, fewer weird issues, sorry. And it means, of course, that the game starts up a fair amount quicker, like, you know, a number of seconds faster, even on good SSDs. We've been working hard on the problem where people will occasionally get disconnected in maps when there is too much data to send you in one go. Like if there's a bunch of items and corpses on the ground and there's ground fire everywhere and maybe you're prolifing some stuff. So there have been marginal improvements to a lot of those areas which are adding up to be pretty effective. And we've also completely revamped ground effects in terms of making it so that they still perform the same graphically as they did before, which isn't actually terrible. We've benchmarked that a bit, and sure, it's, you know, it's a slow effect that we like to improve, but it's not as bad as some people say. But the effects they have on server performance and on the lockstep stuttering and on disconnections was terrible, right? Ground effects were a big problem there, and this is now fixed, so it's much, much better. And we previously were intending to just do this for the map ground effects, but we managed to do it for most things in the game, right? Throwing fire traps and killing Hellions and stuff won't result in lockstep stuttering and occasional disconnections anymore. So we're pretty optimistic about this. It's not eradicating the problem, but it's reducing it again by a large amount, and we're working on hitting all the low-hanging fruit we can find here, so that it basically never occurs.
Of course, the most game-breaking bug that is fixed is that we're displaying challenges above 8 in the 1 month.
Yeah. Because according to our email, that was just the reason why Path of Exile died right there. You know, just like I got my 9th challenge and it vanished. Everyone thinks I'm a pleb.
Yeah. I must admit, I was pretty disappointed when when I
Chris
lost
Wilson
it too.
just say pleb, like really?
Wow, pleb and scrubcore in one
way,
episode.
There is a change in this patch related to ground effects that's worth talking about. So, buffs. When a monster gets a buff, it has to send it to you, right? So if you curse a bunch of monsters, it tells you these monsters are all cursed. This is fine. But Ember Wake plus the Taming, this combo that people were using, you can get an awful lot of ignites. Too many. To the point where when people zone in next to you, they get disconnected because they cannot receive information about all the ignites. So we're capping it so that you can only have 300 ignites on a target at once. Arbitrary limit, but it is a note this number may change by the time it gets released. It says 300 in the notes I have here. But this affects, like, Ember Wake players were probably having a pretty rough time. So yeah, that's nerfed.
Only 300 ignites, guys. Sorry.
Yeah, that should be a number that doesn't overly affect the balance of that situation.
Chat's
We'll be
blowing up.
We'll be posting the patch notes possibly tomorrow, I think, maybe. Yeah, probably tomorrow. And there's a bunch of other smaller things as well. Like, when we released 204, we had to turn off the Den variations from the Toro missions because they were broken. So we just hotfixed that in to remove them. And we'll be turning them back on again because they're fixed. And a bunch of small stuff like that we'll be sorting out as well.
So,
You guys know that zone in Act 2 where it's got some monkeys in it.
Dread Thicket.
Yeah.
The Dread Thicket. That zone. The one I can't even remember the name of. Is there any chance that something might be happening there soon? Maybe with the divination cards that you mentioned dropping from specific bosses, perhaps?
Maybe there are some things in Path of Exile that people just haven't worked out yet. I can think of at least one.
Oh, I see. Maybe I need to start farming Dread Thicket a little more actively.
I think that's the best fishing spot in the game. I don't know. That's what I heard. Anyway.
Monkey fishing.
So I want to talk about divination cards with you, Carl. Yesterday I gave you an example of Reign of Chaos. There's a lot of divination cards where you're like, cool, I have to get 8 cards to get 1 chaos. And when I have all 8, it is now the value of a chance orb. But if I pick it up, it's not the value of a chance orb because I can't sell it. And it won't be a value of a chance orb until I turn it in. The entire last league, just going throughout the course of the game without farming it, I got 1 set complete. And it felt very, very underwhelming. Divination cards such as like Reign of Chaos, are we going to see any improvements upon those in the future?
So when you discussed that yesterday, it was a sort of a little moment. It was like, oh, our model for cards have nothing about the marginal value of picking the card up and trading it in. Now, for the very high value rewards, that's obviously not a problem, but we do have these cards that are interesting and have a low value. So I'm definitely going to add an assumption of the marginal cost that a card has by itself, because I do like the fact that there are cards that also have a sort of a low reward and are still worth getting. So I was a little unhappy when you said, I don't even pick those cards up. And it was like, what? You don't pick them up? You pick up a chance orb, right? And you said, I think you actually said no. Not always.
It's only worth picking it up. It's only worth a chance if I have all 8, because then I get a chaos, and now it's worth 1/8 of a chaos.
So we will make a change to that, and we will build into our model of divination cards that there is a sort of a marginal cost for having to do the card handling and the getting the card in the first place. In general, one of the reasons divination cards have worked well and been popular with players is that the things that the players get to design for the divination card is the thing they understand best about the game, and the thing they understand is what they want. So every divination card lines up with at least what one core of players wants. And so Reign of Chaos rewards you with chaos orbs. We definitely want to make sure that, when you're collecting them, it is of value. And if you see one at the edge of your screen, it is well worth picking it up, because there's plenty more that are going to be on their way, and you're going to be earning currency through that.
Something like Carrion Crow, I don't think I've ever gotten a good base and a good life roll on a Carrion Crow. You can, however, get a 5-link of them. That I have seen, but that's so far and few between. There's a lot of cards out there where you're just like, I'm not picking that up. I'm not touching it.
Yeah, I've got a few good rolls from Carrion Crows. I strangely pick those up more than I'd probably pick up things like Reign of Chaos, where it's just like a fraction of a piece of currency.
So Carrion Crow, I personally think works well in 2 ways. So the first way is, if you're a new player and you don't really know about the value of having some life on your armor, you usually get something that's quite good because you haven't really thought about the importance of life. And the second thing is it's got a nice gambling element. And we've noticed the cards that have quite a strong gambling element, they're very, very popular and players do use them.
But you're gambling twice. You have to gamble on the chess piece, the base, and you're gambling on the life roll. You can get a good chess piece base with 3 life on, and you're like, well, this stinks.
Yep. But if you do get something awesome, you've got a YouTube video right there.
That's true. So you can make a YouTube
Another way of looking at this is, the supporter would like this. This is what they've paid for. We're very happy to add it to the game. Then we have the question, does it drop rarely or commonly? Well, we prefer commonly. Well, people get more shots at it. So that's just what it is, right? Like, it's an interesting item. It's themed well with, you guys may not have worked out the exact rules for why it drops in the areas it does, but there's a lot of cool stuff going on with it. It's one of my favorites in terms of design and theme overall, and thankfully a lot of players get to experience this one. So I think the supporter made a good choice of getting one of the more common div cards in the game, because then his work is appreciated by more people.
Alrighty. Let's go into the next part. Let's talk about what is happening after the 1 month ends.
So we kind of wanted to give a little bit of a teaser and heads up here. So the new Challenge League will not be starting the day the 1 month ends. We have a bit of a gap. We're looking for something to fit in this gap. And so we've come up with another 1 month-ish event, which we're not going to say what it is today, but it's totally different to things that we've done in the past. As in, it's not just a flashback league or a hybrid of 2 previous things. It's something that should hopefully be very interesting. But it's worth noting that with this new event, we're not trying to compete with the previous 1 month in terms of prizes. Because the event by itself is meant to be interesting for reasons that you'll see, we're not really going to go all in with, arranging corporate sponsorship of awesome top-tier prizes and throwing in, 30,000 armor sets and that kind of stuff. So we'll work out something appropriate for the event. But it is another 1 month that is very different than things you've experienced before. And then following that, the new challenge league will start in early-ish December.
Awesome. I'm excited to see what you guys have come up with. That's very different, because I already feel like the flashback leagues are pretty insane.
So everyone's in chat saying 1 month exiles everywhere. That's the point. We're not doing a thing that you know. There is no term for this thing because it's something special.
Oh, you guys need to invent a new name, like Turbo Ruckus.
We did, but we're not saying what it is, just in case things don't pan out. But yeah, we have a plan. This may, of course, all change, right? I might come back to you, tail between my legs later and say, hey, look, so that cool thing didn't happen. But yeah, hopefully it will do. It's looking good. So
everyone's saying 1 month Malachi everywhere. Confirmed? Is that what it is?
They're not thinking crazy enough.
20 Malachis per zone. Not crazy enough. Crazier than
everywhere.
20 Malachis per zone, guys. Confirmed. There you go.
Wow.
That's it. Set your expectation bar there.
20 invasion bosses per zone. Oh my god, I would love that. So let's see. We got the 1 month divination cards, maps. There's one more thing we wanted to talk about. What was it? It was racing.
Are you trolling or?
No, I'm not trolling. There was one more thing. We had to talk about. Trade.
You wanted to ask about trade.
Trade. All right. So I'm going to be honest here. I get on peewee.trade, I search online only, I'll message 5 people. Out of those 5, I might have one person that's not online. I mean, the one person that is online that isn't AFK. Is there anything in the future about trade, Chris? Please.
So we have a lot of different things over time that we're doing to improve trade. And some stuff that we're working on at the moment that can be released this year, or hopefully, is basically some substantial improvements to the way that the community currently interfaces with these third-party tools. We like the third-party tools. POV.trade is a great service. We respect the guy who made it and was trying to give him more power, basically. So we've been working on APIs to improve the experience for both the people who implement these tools so that they can be better, but also streamlining the process for the community, right? Like, at the moment, the steps that someone has to do to engage with trading in Path of Exile are relatively onerous, and we want to make this easier. Now, this doesn't mean we're not going to make larger trading system changes in the future. It's just that stuff is taking time. We do want to get some stuff in soon to improve it so that there's, it's much more friendly to new players. Because while there's a barrier between those who trade with all of the tools and those who don't, that is essentially a barrier that's dictating who has access to those items. And we want to make it much easier for new players to engage with trading.
I think that the highest priority at this point should be making the trade experience using third-party tools better, rather than like straight away trying to just do a full overhaul. So like as a stepping stone before you guys add more mechanics. So does that include things like cross-instance trading or potentially asynchronous trading?
So cross-instance trading and asynchronous trading are both examples of overhaul things that are taking a long time to make. They're both so cross-instance trading is hard because of security. You don't want to be able to dupe items. You want to be able to dupe items, but we don't want you to be able to dupe items using cross-instance trading. So we're only rolling that out at the point when it is totally fine. And something like asynchronous trade is quite a large task, right? Needless to say, it's a thing that's taking some time. And we're prioritizing getting stuff in there that improves the trading ecosystem for people without committing to a specific launch date for the other trading features. There's also philosophical expectations with trade, right? Like, for example, as you know, we don't want to have auction houses. We don't want to have buyout presses. There's problems with this. I feel trade isn't in a particularly good place right now, but with some better infrastructure for the community, it could be in a much better place.
So what sort of examples of supporting third-party tools then, if not things like cross-instance trading?
Well, I'm kind of trying to talk around some stuff we can't announce at the moment, but we should be able to talk about it really soon. We had discussed potentially, if it's ready in time, launching this stuff later this year, but there's the ability to maybe even do it earlier than that. So it depends a lot on when it's ready and tested internally. But an example is that we're improving the APIs for the developers so that there are, Like, put it this way. At the moment, they have to physically scrape the forums. They've got to write a bot that loads up the forum and passes the HTML and JSON and gets the items and puts them in the service. And if they do that too quickly, we IP ban them, right? This isn't a good situation. It means that when you post items, it's slow. You don't know who's online. We'd rather have it so when you post items that's kind of instantly available on the services. You can immediately see who's online with accuracy and all of this kind of stuff, as well as some other stuff we can't talk about yet that you'll probably be pleased with. Like, I'm kind of understating it slightly. But that's because I have to be really careful to not give the expectation. Like, I don't want it that when we announce our next content that people are saying, where's the trading overhaul you promised? You know, it will come when it can come.
More accurate offline, online reporting, I think, would be a huge improvement to our current experience.
Yep.
So it sounds like that's the sort of thing that can come out of this sort of support.
Our timeline for the online-offline reporting is really soon now, right? Like, as far as I'm aware, it's past quality assurance is ready to be rolled out or something for that one, right? Like, it could even be today, but most likely within a few weeks that we have the accurate online-offline reporting stuff sorted out for the trade guys.
Chris, you're supposed to be anti-hyping. You can't say things like today.
Yeah. If it does show up tomorrow, we're going to see some angry Reddit posts, Chris. Just letting you know.
I'll talk to the guys about it today to find out where it's at, but it's likely to be something we can give to them pretty soon.
Today, that means a hot fix at the end of this podcast, right?
Right now.
Jeez.
Well, at least you guys you're aware and you're trying to work on something. You know, you guys did fix desync. We all thought that would never happen. So maybe in due time we will have a fixed trade, because it is so frustrating talking to 5 people that aren't actually there. So I guess you're not really talking to them. So I think that's the end of the podcast. You guys have anything you would like to say before we head out, Chris and Carl?
Well, thank you very much for your time. It's awesome, getting to chat with you guys, and I've, enjoyed reading the comments and chat on Twitch during this. I don't understand half the faces, but yeah, it's pretty cool.
And before we just get a bunch of faces now. And Carl, would you like to say anything before we head out?
Thank you very much for playing. It's been interesting to watch the 1 month, and lots of interesting builds out there. So good.
I appreciate it. One last question before we head off. So we've been saving this one. Chris, the community wants to know, what is phishing? We have these phishing polls and everything.
Secret.
What is the secret behind
ultimate
phishing?
secret.
So this is becoming a little more apparent in the 1 month challenge league. So one of the advantages of running so many different mods at the same time is you actually get interesting phishing encounters that take advantage of more than one of these mods. Like